Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our very first EYC Environmental Lecture of 2021. I am Virginia Tippie, and I'm the chair and co-chair of the Eastport Yacht Club's Environmental Committee with John Butler. And I'm actually an oceanographer, and John is a forester. And so but from both a land and ocean perspective, we care deeply about this special planet that we call Earth. And we are really concerned about the changes that we're seeing on this planet Earth, as are other members of our environmental committee. And I want to also recognize actually Nancy Hames, who's on the call with us. And Nancy is our education outreach coordinator and has put together this wonderful series of lectures that we'll be having through 2021. So thank you, Nancy, for kicking this year off with a great speaker, Elvia Thompson. We appreciate that. But, given the new administration's commitment to address the issue of climate change, both John and I and the entire Green team felt that it would be timely to really discuss the issue of climate change and how our individual actions can make a difference. And did we know that President Biden, on his very first day in office, can you imagine this? He issued an executive order acknowledging and recognizing the importance of the Paris Agreement. But we certainly didn't realize that he would be today, this very day, signing a series of executive orders that are addressing a wide range of issues related to climate change. And he declared today Climate Day. And I think that's pretty darn cool that our special kickoff lecture for the year is on Climate Day. How very special. And we're especially fortunate to have as our speaker today, Elvia Thompson. Elvia is president and co-founder of Annapolis Green. And as many of you know, this important environmental nonprofit organization connects, informs, and inspires all of us, all Annapolis residents, organizations, businesses are involved and connected through Annapolis Green. Many of you actually have attended their very popular green drinks series pre-COVID, but of course they'll get back in action as soon as we're able to, I'm sure. And you've also perhaps gone to the electric car events on Maryland Avenue and West Street just this past fall. Annapolis has been a leader, Annapolis Green specifically has been a leader in the effort to promote electric cars for this area. But if you have ever refused a plastic straw at a bar there in Annapolis, or filled up a reusable water bottle at an event through a reusable water bottle station for water filling, or participated in a zero waste event, or even stopped by their house and gardens there right on State Circle, right there on Maryland Avenue, and maybe bought some, crab feast compost, or possibly just stopped in to ask questions about electric cars or composting, then you have seen the work of Annapolis Green. But what many of you may not know is that before Annapolis Green, Elvia Thompson, the president and co-founder of Annapolis Green, spent many, many years, actually, I won't tell you how many, with a long, distinguished career with the federal government, which actually started as a presidential management intern in 1980, and from there went to NASA, to Department of Defense, and a range of various federal agencies to really help translate technical language into plain English that all of us could understand. And what a difference she has made in that wonderful skill that she has of communicating. But she served as a result of those great skill sets. She has served in her new role as director, president of Annapolis Green, on many nonprofit organizations in the Annapolis area, from Back Creek Conservancy, Spa Creek Conservancy, the Annapolis Maritime Museum, the League of Women Voters, League of Conservation Voters. And at the governmental level, she is actually currently serving on the Maryland Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council. That's a mouthful. Gosh, Elvia, that's a big mouthful. And the Annapolis Transportation Board. These are governmental organizations, obviously, that are critical to making a difference in our community. As a master, truly, that's a big word there, but it is a really big deal around here. As a master watershed steward, and as a member of the Vice-President Gore's Climate Reality Corps, who is right now currently being certified as a climate change professional, a whole new type of certification these days. She is definitely the person to talk to and to share with us the thoughts on how we can make a difference in terms of climate change. So please welcome Elvia Thompson. And Elvia, thank you so much for being with us today on Climate Day.
Thank you, Virginia. You're way too kind. Thanks so much for showing up tonight. I hope you have a glass of wine or some beverage to get you through this talk. I want to say from the outset that I'm not a scientist. So this is going to be kind of a top-level talk, a two-phase talk. First, we're going to talk about climate change in general. What are the issues? Why is this an existential issue for humanity? And then we'll talk about what we can do here in the Chesapeake area. So if I can get this slide to advance. Okay. There we go. So this is our beautiful little blue marble. This was taken from the moon, of course. I worked at NASA for a long time, as Virginia said, and in the early days of the moonshot, all the emphasis was on the destination. Where were we going? We were going to the moon. But then one of the astronauts on Apollo 8 turned around and said, oh my gosh, look at that. Look at moonrise. And doesn't the planet look beautiful, but also so fragile, floating there in space? So this is our planet. This is the only planet we have. There is no planet B. So when we talk about protecting the environment, it's actually protecting our home. So just keep that in mind as we go through here. This was the image that really brought home to people around the world that we are one. And I hope that from this point forward, we can bring that thought back, because we can't solve the climate problem or adjust to climate on our own. We have to do it globally. So this is our atmosphere, a tiny little thin, tiny blanket that protects us from radiation and a lot of other things. And unfortunately, we have been putting a lot of crud, technical term, into the atmosphere for a long time, even though this is what's important. This is what protects us. So every 24 hours, 152 million tons of bad stuff goes into the atmosphere, which is just crazy. So our atmosphere protects us from solar radiation, and this is the way it works. Most of that radiation goes through the atmosphere. Some of it is absorbed. Some of it is radiated back out into space. But when this is out of whack, when we put fossil fuel caused gases into the atmosphere, then the heat can't, and the carbon dioxide can't get back out into space as it would when the system is balanced. And so we end up with global warming. And these are the causes. All of these things contribute greenhouse gases, which are bad for us. So it's everything from what can be either natural or man-made forest fires to the thawing of the permafrost, because of global warming, of course, the use of coal and other fossil fuels in industrial processes, also industrial agriculture is really bad for the atmosphere as well, and the gases that are caused when, are created by landfills. So the largest source of global warming pollution is the burning of fossil fuels, no question. And look at how that chart, how the number goes up from the 1950s, exponentially. And along with that, global surface temperature has increased. So if you don't think that's true, 19 of the hottest years on record have occurred since in this last decade. And 2019 was the hottest year on record when it was done. So I'm sorry, I meant 2020. So it continues. We're on a really bad trajectory. And we see it every day. This is a photo of a person who was overcome by heat stroke in Italy. And it's bad everywhere in the world. So we're talking about Europe here in this photo. Europe is not prepared for 100-degree plus temperatures. If you've been to Europe visiting, you know that most places are not air conditioned. So this is the temperature range that was seen in 2019. And it's just not just there, it's in Asia, 123 degrees in a part of India. And look at this, Siberia. Could you ever imagine that it would be over 100 degrees in Siberia? This is absolutely unheard of. But look at the Arctic in this slide. Oh, I'm sorry. This is about the ocean. 93% of the heat that we create by burning fossil fuels goes into the ocean, with a lot of consequences. So you can see how the temperature of the ocean has increased, and half of that tremendous increase has been in the last 20 years. So this is all about the hydrological cycle of water. Of course, it rains. The water from rain returns eventually to the sea through rivers and streams, and then it evaporates and it starts all over. But with an atmosphere that is hot, that all gets out of whack. And one of the results, one of the things that happens is really big and strong storms. Because hurricanes, for instance, feed off of hot water. So this was in the Gulf, Hurricane Harvey, and it got as strong as it did because of how hot the water in the Gulf was. And the other thing that's been happening too as a result of this kind of thing is that hurricanes get stronger faster. So you have all seen, I'm sure, the meteorologists on television where they're predicting a level 1 hurricane, and 24 hours later it's a 5 or a 4, and this again is unheard of until we got to this point with heat in the water. And big hurricanes like this cause tremendous damage, as you know, Louisiana. It seems like every time that there's a hurricane, the meteorologists are saying, this is the strongest recorded. This is the most water ever. This is the most amount of rain that ever fell in this area. And it's everywhere around the world. So this is what we're facing. That was India, this is California. Basically, the pictures look the same, no matter where it is. I wanted to show you this because look at this picture. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this picture is that the sun is out. This is sunny day flooding in Miami Beach. And this happened to be the same day that I was being trained by Al Gore in Miami. So he went off to see this flooding in person and was a little bit late to the training event. But it was really interesting. This happens in Miami all the time, in Miami Beach. And what they're doing there is they're raising the road, which is at best a temporary fix. But look at this slide in England. Look at the water against the window. Isn't that amazing? You know, this is something that they just have never seen in that part of the world. So this is where we are now. Extreme rainfall events and floods and bad things like this are occurring more than ever, more than in the last 40 years. So cities are at risk all over the world. Now, this is a chart that shows assets, meaning infrastructure, buildings, things like that. Look at that. Miami is like right at the top. And oddly enough, the same heat events that cause all that additional rain and storms and everything also cause floods and drought. And big storms inland too, like this tornado, which is unbelievable. This is Montana, I believe. So there are a lot of counties in the United States that are super vulnerable to this kind of disaster. But look at what's happening, just like with COVID. The places that are the hardest hit are usually minority communities. So that's one thing that the Biden administration is doing is in the announcement today, they're not going to leave folks in distressed communities behind, whether it's in job creation or looking out for mitigation of flooding and things like that. So this is Brazil. This is what a drought looks like. So along with drought and heat, additional heat comes fires. So look at the justification, look at the juxtaposition of temperature with fires. I mean, it almost goes hand in hand. And the fires are everywhere. So this is Canada. You remember the pictures in California. The catastrophes are all over the place and rising. That chart continues to go up. So that's heat. And the heat also affects glaciers. It affects land ice, like this glacier in Greenland. And this is really bad because sea ice is one thing, but ice on land, like in the form of glaciers, is something else. Because when that melts and that water hits the ocean, it expands and adds to the sea level rise issues. So there are 10 cities that have been assessed and are in the most dangerous situation from sea level rise. And you can see the first two are in India. And there's Miami again. Now, this is something that I wanted to especially highlight today, given President Biden's executive order today. He declared that climate change is a national security issue. People have been saying this for a long time. The Department of Defense was one of the first federal departments to recognize the seriousness of climate change, way back, actually, even before 2014. And why? Because when people are hungry, when they can't raise crops, when they are run off their land by flooding, they have to go somewhere and they become climate refugees. And we already have climate refugees in the world. And that causes instability, which is then a national security issue all over the world. So speaking of not being able to raise crops, yes, crops are very susceptible to heat, but there's another thing too, and that is that even as population continues to increase, meaning that we need to raise more food, there's an interesting phenomenon, and that is when there is a lot of carbon dioxide in the air, more than normal, more than before such a tremendous use of fossil fuels, the food then is less nutritious. So here we are having to feed a growing population with crops that are susceptible to heat and drought, and then when they do grow are less nutritious. And that's when farmers can actually plant. And in 2019, a lot of them couldn't, and even last year, they were prevented from putting the seeds in the ground because of all the rain. So weather disasters are an economic issue as well, weather disasters that come from climate change. So that was the international top level of disaster having to do with weather. Here, this man represents the personal impact of climate change. He was growing wheat, now he can't grow anything but sand. And that, again, it goes back to what I said about instability. And instability in places that are already unstable. So, you know, you have people going into camps, refugee camps, or going into already overcrowded cities, and that is a recipe for disaster. And further, around the world, there are places that are going to be uninhabitable because of heat, because of drought, because of fire, because of climate change. Now, where are these 1 billion climate migrants going to want to go? They're going to want to go live someplace where they can have a decent life. And that means developed countries that are already under pressure, as you saw in the past couple of years with people leaving for economic reasons and reasons having to do with war. And then you put climate change on top of that, and you can see how serious the situation is. And then closer to home, we have our very own climate refugees. People have left areas like this in California to live elsewhere. And actually they are, even though they stay in the United States, they are climate refugees. And I want to show you next a photo that is the strangest photo I think I've ever seen. Look at this. Here is an inferno, not that far away. And these guys are out here hitting a golf ball. This is insane. But this is exactly where we have been about climate change. We've had our heads in the sand, not wanting to admit that this really exists. But it does. It's here, and we're seeing it right now. So this is actually a little bit out of order, but this is what I was talking about. The ice, whether you're talking about Arctic ice or Antarctic ice, is super important, particularly for sea level rise. And I tell you, every time that a report about climate change comes out, it seems like it's more dire than the last. And it seems like the previous predictions weren't even dire enough. So 4 times faster than we thought. There's an example. And look at the loss of ice in Antarctica. Now, going back to speaking about climate refugees, Kiribati, a very small island nation in the Pacific, has already bought land elsewhere because they know they're going to have to leave quite soon. But think about the countries that don't think ahead like this. You know, where are they going to go? They're going to put more pressure on developed countries and on all of the systems, including medicine. Climate change is a medical emergency. It's a medical emergency not just because of heat stroke and things like that, but also because of the diseases that can come our way as things get warmer. The natural ecosystems are being disrupted. But we continue to cut down forest and all that kind of thing so that wild animals have less room to live naturally, so they come closer to where we live, which is a great way to have zoonotic diseases that pass from animals to people. So that's another issue we have to deal with. In addition to tropical diseases that are on the move as things get warmer, diseases that were formerly in the tropics are now going to find their way into temperate zones where we live. And it's all of these wonderful things like West Nile virus and all this. We will see this up here. We may see malaria up here eventually. And this little wonderful guy here who carries the Zika virus. But the thing is that the people who suffer the most are the ones who have the most to lose, or the least to lose, the poorest. And this is recognized everywhere, even by the Pope. There are campaigns that look at climate change as ecological devastation caused by the developed world and the burning of fossil fuels. And then it also cuts down on the species. And when you don't have diversity, the natural diversity that our Earth thrives on, then things get completely out of whack. And it just doesn't work. So that is what a lot of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere costs. That is the cost. All of these things. Now, before you want to go shoot yourself, stick with me here. Stick with me, because it'll get better here in just a second. So as you can see from what was just presented, we've got to change. So yes, we can change. Absolutely. We have what we need to do on hand, meaning that we know what to do. We just have to have the political will the societal will to make it happen. Here's an example. We've got plenty of wind capacity so that we don't have to go to fossil fuels. And the marketplace recognizes that. So if you want to lose money in stocks, then invest in conventional energy like petroleum. It's just not there. You can see here, Reuters, energy's been the worst performer in the US bull stock market. So that's not the place to put your money, and where you put your money makes a big difference. And the marketplace recognizes that. Look at this. They're not gonna finance, the old technology, the technology of the past. And even big organizations like this, big petroleum companies like BP, have admitted that they're just gonna leave the natural gas and the oil in the ground because it's just not worth it to spend all that money to pull it out. So new coal plants. Remember the previous president said he was going to bring coal back? No, it was never going to come back. The market wasn't going to let that happen. Existing plants were retired, new plants were not built. So coal is not going to come back. But what we need to do now, and the new president recognizes, is that we need to take care of the people who did work in the coal plants and in the coal mines so that they can feed their families with different kinds of jobs. So here's where we are in energy consumption in this country. It's down. It's down definitely down with coal, but look at the renewables. And we're at the tipping point right now, and this is great. And we're at the tipping point because there's so much capacity, so much technology has been invested in this. So look at this. We could supply, with wind alone, we could supply everything that we need 40 times over. And in places like Texas, the wind is so abundant that in some places they're supplying free electricity at night because they've got more than they need. And other countries are in this too. So China has installed more solar power than any other country in the world. The cost of lithium-ion batteries are going down. And also there's work being done to not use lithium, to use nickel and other ores instead. But in the meantime, this is where we are with lithium-ion. And Tesla has invested tremendously, as you know, in the United States, but also in Australia. And they have built this lithium-ion battery plant at a wind farm in South Australia, which I think is very interesting. And here in my home state of Florida, Florida Power and Light just figured out that it could replace two of its gas-fired plants. So the Sunshine State, you would think that there would be solar panels all over Florida. There aren't. It's just mind-boggling. And other utilities have decided to demolish or retire their plants that are being operated on fossil fuels. And it's surprised some people in the marketplace. So to kind of sum this up, this is where we are. So that was 2014. This is 2019. And a couple of years from now, it's just going to be so much cheaper. And that's what drives the marketplace. And it also drives other technologies like electric cars, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. So this is how many are on the road now. In case you don't know, Maryland has a policy that 300,000 electric cars are going to be on the road by 2025. We're just at about 10% of that now. So we have a lot of catching up to do. But there's a big movement for government fleets, business fleets to go electric as well, school buses, transit buses. So it's moving along. And if you think that they're too expensive, they are just about at price parity right now. So, but I don't want to talk about this too much right now because we'll talk about it later. Locations that are planning a complete fossil fuel phase out. Look at these countries. Now, why isn't the United States on this list? Well, maybe it will be very soon. And auto manufacturers see it coming as well. You've seen now that there are so many more ads for electric cars on television, and that's because they see where this is going. Electric bus is super important. If you've ever been in traffic behind a diesel bus, you know what I'm talking about. And these are cities that have committed to buying only zero emission buses starting in 2025. Not soon enough for me, but you know, still. And I would love to have Annapolis on this list. So when the federal government was really not doing much of anything about climate change, 24 states started their own climate alliance to see what they could do individually and working together, even when the federal government wasn't leading. But here's the really important part: the marketplace. 260 huge companies have made a commitment to go 100% renewable. And look at these names. These are the big guys. There's Kellogg's, there's Mars, there's Google. I mean, this is what's really going to make the difference. And why are we doing this? Why am I talking about this? Why have I been working on this for so many years? It's because of these guys. Everything that we're doing to make climate, to mitigate the effect of climate change, to adapt to it, is for these guys. And these kids get it. They understand. They understand what's coming, and they want action now. So there are commitments that are being made around the country to 100% renewable energy by different dates. And there's little Columbia, Maryland, 100% committed to 100% renewable energy. And solar energy continues to progress as well. Solar PV installations are going through the roof, no pun intended. And while the cost of the solar cells in those installations are going down. And this is one of my favorite photos. Look at this. This is the old world and the new world meeting together. And you know that in most developed countries, almost everybody's got a cell phone because it costs too much to run lines for electricity or for phones. So solar power for electricity, and then mobile phones for communication. But look what happened in Chile, a relatively small country, right? This was their market. But look what happened since 2018. The installed capacity not only went through the roof, it went into space. And this is just one small country. This is what we need here. Because we've got enough solar energy right now. The sun provides everything that we need. We just need to harness it properly. And we have enough global storage capacity to use that energy for good. And we're saving energy too because of things like LED lights. Look at that. It's grown tremendously. So we can change. So the answer to this, can we change? Yeah, we've got what we need to do it. Now, will we? Well, yeah, it looks like we're on the right trajectory. We're back in the Paris Agreement, recognizing that we can't do things on our own, that it's got to be an international system. And people in the United States get it, and they want this change. This is a photo of the climate march in Washington. So here's what we need to do. We need to put our voices and our votes and our choices together to fight the climate crisis. So I urge you to use your voice and your vote and your choices to speak truth to power, and to make your voice heard in the marketplace. What you buy, what you choose, really makes a difference. So act like your world depends on it, because it does. So if you give me a moment here, I'm gonna just switch the slide deck and do a very short presentation on what we can all do individually, which is what Virginia asked me to talk about. So give me just a minute here. Sorry. Zoom is still a little bit awkward. Okay, I'm hoping that you can see this. And I hope that I didn't leave you sad and overwhelmed with the previous presentation, but you got to know the truth. And it is overwhelming. And we're all only individual people. So can we make a difference? Yes, we can make a difference. Absolutely. But first I want to talk a little bit about how climate change affects us here in the Chesapeake. We have a unique phenomenon in the Chesapeake, and that is that not only are we being affected by sea level rise, but the land is sinking. It's called subsidence. So when you put those two together, that makes us much more vulnerable to sea level rise in general. So over the last 100 years, the water's risen about a foot. And in the next 100 years, it's going to be somewhere between 1.3 to 5.2, maybe more. I know in Annapolis, the government is planning for, I believe, an 8-foot rise. You know, this says Chesapeake Bay, but, you know, it's different in different areas. But nonetheless, all over the bay, it's faster than the global average. And if you haven't seen the maps of what can happen to Annapolis at different states of sea level rise, you should have a look at that. Eastport is gonna, the waterfront is gonna be a lot further in than it is now. And it's not just whether your home or your business is on the water. Think about the roads. Your house may be okay because it's maybe 2 feet higher, but if the road is flooded and you can't get to your house, and that's another thing. So all these are good reasons to mitigate as much as we can the effects of climate change. The other thing that we see happening in the Chesapeake is that as the water rises, the forests turn into marsh, and then eventually it turns into open water. I mean, you've all seen, I assume you've all seen the videos and the stories about what's happening on the Eastern Shore and how places are just being lost, completely being lost. The other effects in the Chesapeake is that new species coming north, whether they're fish or other types of wildlife, in favor warmer conditions, could eventually create a whole new ecosystem in the Chesapeake. And some of the native species like eelgrass that have a very narrow window of heat, of how hot the water is in order to live, that little window may be exceeded by heat. And also warmer water holds less oxygen, which means that those dead zones are going to be more frequent and bigger. And of course there will be, because of warmer water, there is a greater chance for big storms. And finally, sadly, ocean acidification, which will affect the bay, even if it's brackish water, affects the ability of shellfish to form strong shells, so oysters and crabs. So that's super serious. And if you want to know more about that, go to the Chesapeake Bay Programs website, as you can see here. So what can you do right now? It's so overwhelming. Okay, so I have a few things that you can do right now. You can plant trees, as many trees as you can. A tree is the best machine for drawing carbon down out of the atmosphere. And further, native trees are what we need. Native trees promote healthy, balanced habitats. So if you're planting anything at all, trees, shrubs, whatever, plant natives. Natives are what we need. The insects and the other wildlife in this area grew up with those plants grew up with them. Everything was in balance. Every time you introduce a non-native plant or tree, it's not a good thing. And the Audubon has this to say, to explain better than I did why native plants are important. It's the ecological basis upon which life depends, including birds, people, frogs, insects, and everything is all weaved together. If the pandemic has shown us nothing else, it's shown us how interconnected we are, not only with each other, but also with nature. We're not the masters of nature, we are the stewards. We need to recognize that. Maryland has a number of programs to help you plant trees. This is just one of them. The Marylanders plant trees. If you have any questions about that, I'll be glad to tell you what I know. Second thing you can do, reduce your use of plastic. Remember that plastic's made out of fossil fuels, and plastic doesn't break down, it breaks up. It breaks up into microscopic pieces that are now in us. The estimate is that we ingest, every human being ingests the equivalent of a credit card of microplastics in food, in the air that we breathe, and in the water we drink. It is in us already. So we need to reduce the amount of plastic that we use. We can't eliminate it. We don't want to eliminate it. I mean, if you go to the hospital, you want things to be disposable because you're concerned about, not getting an infection. But other things are just ridiculous for them to be plastic, like plastic bags. Plastic bags are number one, agent that breaks up into little tiny pieces. And that most plastic bags are used for about 30 seconds. And recycling, let me tell you, recycling is not a free pass. Very little of any kind of plastic around the world is recycled. We used to think, and before we all knew better, that recycling was the way to go. No, reduce, refuse. That's the way to go. And reuse if you can. But the single-use plastics are absolutely killing us. And the pandemic was the perfect storm for the people who make plastics. They sold us on the idea that that plastic means hygienic, it means clean, it means good for protecting yourself from COVID. No. I was horrified when the CDC put out, under the previous administration, put out guidance that we should all use plastic cutlery during Thanksgiving, as if we don't all have soap and water or a dishwasher in our kitchens. So we have a number of ideas on ways that you can reduce your use of plastic, say no to plastic cutlery. It's not recyclable. And you heard what I just said about recycling anyway. You can buy shampoo in cake form, like soap, instead of in plastic bottles. Same with toothpaste. For heaven's sake, forget balloons. They escape. They're a ridiculous way to use helium when we need helium for other things like MRI machines. Other things come in different kinds of containers, deodorants. Plastic cling wrap can be easily replaced by waxed wraps. I mean, there's just so many other things that we can do. Our grandparents got along without all this plastic, and we can too. Driving electric is the third thing that I wanted to tell you that you can do. You really can right now. So in Maryland, 80% of greenhouse gases emitted come from cars and trucks. You can help with that by getting an electric car. They're now affordable. We are at price parity. Charging infrastructure is growing all the time. You can make a long trip in an electric car because the infrastructure is developed enough. So I can tell you more about that if you like. And I've got a couple slides on that. But basically, I'm trying to wrap this up quickly because we're running out of time. But basically how EVs work, there's an electric, there's a motor that runs the wheels. It takes its electricity from the grid, or if you have solar power, solar panels in your house from the sun. And there are three types of EVs. There is the hybrid, which I do not recommend. There is the plug-in hybrid, which I also don't recommend. And then there's the purely battery electric. The reason that I'm shaking my head at hybrids and plug-in hybrids is that they are still gasoline cars with small electric motors, but they're still gasoline cars. So why would you want to carry around all that stuff that has to do with an electric car, that has to do with a gas car, when you don't need to? So the big thing about electric cars is that there's essentially no maintenance. You really do save money, not only on not having to buy gasoline, you do good for the environment, but it's much, much cheaper to run them. There's no maintenance. You rotate the tires and you check the brakes, and that's about it. And speaking of braking, in an electric car, when you step on the brakes, that power that you're using goes back into the battery. And there's a more technical explanation of that, but I'm just trying to get through the top level here. The benefits of EVs, as I said, little maintenance, no toxic exhaust, instant torque. You step on that accelerator and it takes off like a rocket. And it's the only way to go. There are 3 different kinds of charging. There's home, which is kind of slow, but still works. It's kind of like a trickle charge. Level 2, which is what you see like at the Giant or at Maryland Hall. And then there's DC fast charging, which you see there's one station at the West Street Library, and then there's another one in the town center in Pearl. You can charge away from home in a million different places. This is just one app that shows you where the charging stations are. This is another one that shows you where they are across the country. And then Tesla has its own supercharger network, which is all over the place. So driving electric is normal now. It's not, you know, weird anymore. The cars don't look like little toy cars. You can't even tell it's electric unless there's, you know, something on the plate that tells you. And then like with an ICE, by the way, stands for internal combustion engine. Like with an ICE car, do your research before you go. Talk to me. You know, you got to know what you're doing before you go to the dealership. And if you're saying, well, but I drive to Florida once a year, so this is not good. Oh, no. Don't let that 1 trip or 2 trips a year change, you know, what you do. Why would you pollute the air for a whole year just because you're thinking about this trip that you're going to make? It makes no sense. This is from the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater DC. This is a great information sheet that tells you all about the electric cars that are available now. And we have to change this like every 6 months because so many more models are coming up now. So summing up, EVs are here to stay. I mean, everybody is mentioning them, including the president. Senator Schumer mentioned it in an interview yesterday. That's one that electrifying our personal and government fleets is one of his highest priorities after COVID. So it's everywhere. So back to the last thing that you can do is make your voice heard. Keep your elected officials accountable. A lot of promises are being made right now. We got to keep their feet to the fire and make sure that this really happens. And vote with your wallet. If you go to the grocery store and what you want is packed in plastic, go to the help desk there and say to them, I want to buy this, but I don't want this plastic. I do that at Whole Foods when I buy something from the deli. I tell them they automatically go to the plastic container. I say, no, I want this in cardboard. So you can make changes just by asking for what you want. And speaking of the elected officials, this is Climate Reality's wish for the Biden administration. And I think all of these things are going to happen. And I just want to say climate justice is a big part of this. We don't want to leave anybody behind. We don't want to forget about the communities that have been really hurt by the placement of incinerators and landfills and everything in their area. You know, we want to fix that. And we also want to remember the people who are in legacy jobs that need to be retrained into green jobs. So all of this administration's statements on climate related or environmental related issues have to do with jobs and with justice, economic and environmental justice. And finally, that's what I was just mentioning. And I want you to know the General Assembly has hundreds of bills under consideration now, and about 100 of them, probably more, have to do with the environment. These are the big issues that are being dealt with right now. The Climate Solutions Act has a whole huge number of things in it. It's a terrific bill. More equitable transit and green transit. As I mentioned before, buying zero emission buses, banning plastic bags, and restricting the use and disposal of serious chemicals like PFAS, which is some of this, one of the chemicals that's in Teflon and firefighting foam. It's been found in drinking water. This is really bad stuff. So trying to get that banned. And then overriding the governor's veto to prohibit the use of chlorpyrifos, which is a pesticide that is terrible for bees, other pollinators, for the health of and brain development of children. That bill was passed last year, right before they went out of session, had the short session. And for some reason that we still don't understand, the governor vetoed it. So trying to get that veto overturned. So my final talk is, do your bit, do your bit. What you buy, what you say, letters you write, conversations you have with your neighbors, they all make a difference. Plant those trees. Use less plastic. Think about things before you buy them. You know, is it made out of plastic? Do you really need it? Drive electric and be an involved citizen. And if we all do all that, we can take the right path, and we can solve this problem. And our kids, grandchildren, 7 generations down the road will be happy that we did that. So thank you. That's just a little bit of advertising about Annapolis Green, and I'll be delighted to answer questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Elvia. That was great. We would like to, I know there's some, sure, lots of questions. So what I'd like to do is ask our facilitator to open up the, essentially the chat room so that folks can ask questions. And also what I would like to do is just to ask people to unmute themselves if they have a question. And I'd like to first, though, ask John Butler, do you want to ask any question of Elvia?
I don't have a question right now, but that was a great, very comprehensive presentation. I love the part at the end showing some hints of things that we can do. So thank you very much for putting that together for us.
I hope it wasn't too much doom and gloom, but there is a lot of doom and gloom out there.
Well, it's important to know that side of it, you know, but there is, like you pointed out, there are things that we can do. So that's the good, that's the, you know, the good side. And then it has to be done, or, you know. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, John. And I know, Elvia, I have a question for you right off the bat. I know today's, as we mentioned earlier, is Climate Day, at least in the White House for sure. And one of the key things that was interesting to me in the variety of executive orders that were signed was a commitment on the part of the president to direct federal agencies and everyone to set as a goal achievement of 30% conservation of federal lands and property on land, in the ocean and on land. And I think that was pretty impressive, and was wondering if you had any thoughts about the need or importance of conserving and protecting marine areas as well as land areas.
Well, we absolutely need wild areas. There's no question. The animals and plants need to be left alone, basically, in as much as we can. But the other thing that is worth noting about all of these announcements that have been made is that this administration is approaching all of this in exactly the same way, because they are looking for all of the departments to work together, because this crosses lines. I mean, much like in Annapolis, we have a resiliency officer. So we have essentially a climate guru in the form of John Kerry, and with the assistance of, Gina McCarthy, who used to be EPA director, so that they will have a say into every single department, so that decisions will be made with climate and environmental justice in mind, regardless of what the department is. And that really gives me hope, because that's the only way to do it.
For sure. We also have actually a series of questions coming that are being directed to me. Folks, please feel free to direct quick questions to me to ask Elvia if you wished. Ginger DeLuca just wanted to be sure to comment that you sure had good timing today, because the President Biden introduced the climate czar today, and as you mentioned, Senator Kerry is now our new foreign policy climate czar. And literally, of course, it not only did the president say that it's a national security issue, but climate change is also a priority foreign policy issue. And of course, with John Kerry at the lead, I think we're in good shape. But do you have any thoughts about Senator Kerry serving in that role, and also with regard to this commitment from the foreign policy perspective as well as the national security perspective?
Oh, I think it's great. I mean, I think that it's going to permeate every relationship with every country, whether it's an emitting country or a country that's being affected by the emissions. We have all of most of the population of the world lives on the coast of their country. So this is going to have a huge effect. Yeah. I think that it being, again, because it crosses departments, then of course, climate change is going to be part of what State Department does and what DOD does with other countries, no question.
Also, we have a question from Ursula Kuhn about your thoughts about composting and the importance of composting, or what
Yeah.
concerns regarding.
Thank you. Thanks, Ursula. So one of the things that there wasn't time to get to was the pandemic has shown us how fragile our supply chains are for food. And I think it is super important for people to grow at least a little bit of their own food. I mean, not only to have the food on hand, fresh food on hand that you've grown yourself, but also, particularly if you have children, to make that connection with the land, because the kids aren't going to protect something that they don't understand. So we advocate very much through our Here We Grow program that people put in a tomato here and there, or a green pepper plant in among the flowers or the shrubs in the yard. Nobody will notice, but you will when you go out and harvest. So yeah, that's a great idea. And compost is absolutely the way to provide nutrition to all of these plants. So much better than artificial fertilizers, which, by the way, were an outgrowth of chemical warfare. So they have a not so good legacy. It's much better to use natural materials like compost. Absolutely. And we will be selling pumpkin spice compost in the spring that came from our compost collection. And that's another thing, the community really wants to do this. We showed the city of Annapolis that there is, no pun intended, an appetite for composting. We had something like 10,000 pounds of pumpkins that we collected, pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns. And people were happy to bring to Truxton Park instead of putting them in the trash and having them end up in the landfill. And so all that's being made into compost right now, which is going to be just wonderful for flowers in the spring.
Can I add to it? This is Ursula. I was thinking more on the lines of like paper towels and cardboard and this sort of stuff, and actually having a compost at your home, a bin at your home.
Sure, you can have a bin at your home, but there are things that you can't put into a home compost pile because your pile won't get big enough to get hot enough to break down things like bones and shells and oil and that kind of thing. So that's
right. Yeah, I happen to have two bins. I put the stuff in one while the other one is cooking, so to speak. But and I realized that you don't want to put anything. I don't put anything meat in there, or any, I might put a oyster shell or something like that in. But the composting, I think, is something that a lot of people could do, and and it would help out a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you live in an apartment or something where you can't, there are services like Annapolis Compost that will come and pick it up in a bucket that they provide once a week. So you're composting, it's just that you're not doing it yourself, but it's still not going to the landfill.
Right, so add that to your list.
Things to do. We have a related to plants and composting and all that good stuff. There's a question from Judy Village as to where can we go to get native trees and plants here in this area?
Oh, there's lots of places. Yeah, there are nurseries that are dedicated just to that. There is the Providence Center, which has the additional mission of working with people with disabilities. They have a greenhouse where they grow natives. There are quite a few, and I don't have them all right at the top of my head, but I'd be glad to talk with anybody who who's got that question. And Judy, I know where you live, so I can answer your question directly.
Also, we have a question from Jennifer Aiken regarding, thank you, first of all, but how do you connect all this info to folks that don't want to hear it and people that really don't care? how do we get them to be part of this change as well?
Yeah, isn't that a question? You know, when somebody says to me, well, I'm not an environmentalist, my answer in my head is always, well, are you not a human being? Do you not live on this planet? I just don't understand how anybody could not care about the environment that nurtures them, that gives them air and water. The only way that I can think that we make that connection is maybe through the children of those people, by exposing them to nature, by you know, walks and kayak trips and gardening, stargazing, bird watching, you know, anything having to do with nature. That's the only way that I can think to do that. You know, getting kids away from the screens,
Yeah,
is the way to do it.
okay, we also have a question on how long does it take for bleached coral to recover? Even if
Oh,
we turn the tide here, how long would it take for them to recover?
you could probably answer that better than I can, Virginia. I know that if it's caught quickly, it will recover, but after just a matter of days, it won't. And all you could do is think that skeleton will then be the base for new coral polyps to attach to make a new reef. And I know that in places like Hawaii, there are scientists who are actually growing the coral polyps, much like oysters are being grown here in the Bay. And then divers are going and attaching them to bleached reefs to bring them back. But Virginia is way more expert in ocean topics like this than I am. And also, you should all know that the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center and all of its coastal scientists has a ton of information about things like this. We try to list all of their talks and everything on our website, but they have world-class expertise down there in Edgewater and do offer quite a bit of public education.
Well, we can also share some of that information, contact information with our environmental committee and with Annette Good, who asked.
We do list
question.
everything that we hear about that has any connection to nature or the environment on our website on annapolisgreen.com.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the environment, one of the other questions we had that's sort of is whether desalinization is sustainable. In other words, i.e., won't adversely affect the environment.
Desalinization for drinking water is
I believe that's,
well, okay. So assuming that that's what the question is about,
yeah.
There are places that do that. Saudi Arabia, I think, does. But my understanding is that it takes an incredible amount of energy to do that. Now, if you're running running that plant on solar power, then fine, go for it. But that's really all I know about that. I'm really, no pun intended, out of my depth.
Well, we also have another question. What is happening with natural gas consumption? So many houses are heated with natural gas. What is the best alternative besides heat pumps, which don't produce warm air? Will all new houses have natural gas alternatives for heat? What about retrofitting houses that are heated by natural gas?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of natural gas because it is a fossil fuel. It's not as bad as petroleum, but it's still a fossil fuel. And you have to think about not only the burning of it, but the extraction process. We're not fracking in Maryland, thank goodness. But fracking is going on all around the world, and it's a very disturbing process. And the emissions from natural gas do hurt the environment. So the best of all worlds is to go with renewables. Now, for heating your home, if you can afford it and you can put in geothermal wells, that's a great way to go, because what that does is it has you start at about 50 degrees or so. So whether you're cooling or heating, your system has less of a delta to overcome to make your house either cool or warm. So that's a great way to go. But as far as the fuel that you're using, the best would be renewables. And what you're looking for may not exist right now, but it will. It will, and probably in short order. And there are also proposals that new construction has to be wired for for solar panels, has to be wired for electric vehicle charging. So even construction regulations are being looked at, with an eye toward the future.
Great. We also had, for those who had questions regarding the native plants, a suggestion was made by Wilkie Nelson to check out marylandflora.org/nurseries. That there's great information there, and we can post that on our website as well.
Yeah, we're working to present a talk. Annapolis Green wants to present a talk in the next couple of months, before spring, specifically on native plants, on native plant alternatives to the things that we're all familiar with that are not native. So look for that coming up soon.
Oh, great. And also too, I think there another question was about ways to on aboard boats to really effectively reduce waste, and concerns about the environment. And a comment that many boaters are right now using composting toilets on board fairly successfully, as opposed to having to go to a discharge site,
Well, also the power system. So we have a company right in Annapolis that specializes in repowering boats, from diesel to clean fuels. So that's Annapolis Hybrid Marine. So that's coming. There are also lines of boats that are that have solar panels, that have electric drive, just like cars. So it's out there and it's growing. I mean, I know that there's a company even developing an electric, a battery operated plane, small plane.
Wow.
So this is absolutely the way of the future. And I was also thinking about the previous question of how do you talk to people who don't believe this? Well, those people are kind of like the vestiges of the past, because the future will prevail, and they're just they're not going to be the majority. And I don't think they're the majority now. I think that people are really waking up to this. And I think that also that the pandemic had a lot to do with it, because it kind of made clear how connected we all are around the world.
Yes. Speaking of connection, I think we need to start to close off. We've gone over a bit, but that's okay, because there were so many questions. I know actually some more are still coming in, but what we'd like to do is wrap it up and say thank you so very much,
Well, you're
Elvia,
welcome.
for your time.
And Virginia, if you want to send me those questions, I'll do the best I can to answer them individually.
Okay, we can certainly send you the
But
questions.
it was my pleasure to be with you tonight. And again, I hope that I didn't, make you upset or overwhelmed or anything, but this really is a huge problem. It was about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer, where my business partner, Lynn Forsman, and I went to address a group. And they wanted to just know kind of in general about what was going on with the environment in Annapolis. And I started from the get-go to launch into climate change when people just weren't talking about this. And they looked at me like I was from outer space. So I'm glad that we've come full circle now, and that this is now, front of mind, top of mind, because we all need to deal with this, whether we want to or not. And the other thing, I want to say, is that we need to be willing to make ourselves a little uncomfortable or inconvenienced sometimes. It might be easier. Okay, it is easier to reach for a paper towel instead of grabbing a cloth tea towel, using it, and then washing it. But my gosh, why wouldn't you? So that's why I think about, think about things that you buy. Like today, I went to buy, I have a recipe that called for canned tomatoes. Well, I bought those tomatoes in glass, because I just don't want any more, try to reduce as much as possible, because I can use that glass jar for something else. Yeah. So it's all about thinking about what we're doing.
Yeah, reuse and recycle.
Yeah.
Reuse and recycle.
Express your opinion about the bills in the General Assembly. We are much closer to our representatives in the State House than we are to our representatives in the Capitol. So get to know these bills, get on the League of Conservation Voters hot list so that you know what those bills are, and write letters, make phone calls, send emails, and tell your representatives what you think. We have a great cadre of representatives with our 2 delegates and our senator in Anne Arundel County. But you know, they still need to hear. They still need to hear from us that we are backing, you know, the positions that they're taking, or that we want them to take a different position. So don't hesitate to do that. So you can express yourself by what you buy, how you spend your money, vote with your wallet, and also by keeping the elected officials accountable. And
Great.
plant those trees.
Well, thank you. You've tonight have really truly accomplished Annapolis Green's mission of informing and connecting and inspiring. It was very inspirational. Thank you so much.